Vialkos had been to many planets. He had sat in many war rooms. He had watched many armies prepare for battle. But he had never felt the kind of quiet dread he felt the morning the High Council told him he was going to travel with the humans. It was not the assignment that troubled him. It was the reason for it. 3 of the Confederation's best military divisions were gone, not retreating, not regrouping, gone. The Ravager Collective had swept through Sector 9 like fire through dry grass, and everything the Confederation had sent to stop them had simply ceased to exist. The council chamber, usually a place of careful and measured debate, had dissolved into something close to panic. Generals were shouting over each other, maps were being thrown onto the main table. Someone knocked over a data terminal and no one stopped to pick it up. Vialkos stood near the back of the room and watched all of this. He was a diplomat by training. He understood politics. He understood posturing. He understood fear dressed up as strategy. He had seen all of it before. But what he saw in that chamber was something different. These were not people pretending to be afraid. These were people who had run out of ideas and were only just now realizing it. The motion to request human military assistance came from a council member named Oros Ve, a small and usually quiet figure from the outer systems. The room went still when he said it. Then it went loud again, louder than before. Several generals spoke at once. One of them said that asking the humans for help would be a humiliation the Confederation might never recover from. Another said that the Confederation needed to think carefully before inviting that kind of firepower into an already unstable region. A third said nothing. She just looked at the floor. The vote passed. Barely. And Vialkos was chosen to go with them as an official observer, which was a polite way of saying that the council wanted someone watching in case the humans caused problems of their own. He packed a single bag. He filed the necessary forms. He tried to sleep and could not. The human vessel he was assigned to was called the Arden's Cross. He had expected something sleek and intimidating. What he found when he arrived at the docking port was a ship that looked like it had been in several serious accidents and repaired by people who were not overly concerned with appearances. There were scorch marks along the lower hull that had been welded over but not repainted. One of the landing struts had a slight lean to it. Vialkos stood on the dock and looked at this ship for a long moment and thought about what the galaxy had come to. And then the noise hit him. There was music coming from somewhere inside. There were voices, more than one conversation happening at once, layered over each other in a way that sounded chaotic but also, somehow, comfortable. Someone laughed. It was a big, easy laugh, the kind that comes from a person who is not worried about anything. Vialkos could not understand how anyone on that ship could be laughing. They were being sent to a sector that had just swallowed 3 military divisions. He checked the time. They were less than 6 hours from departure. He boarded the ship and was met by a young soldier named Corporal Wade Hunt, who was supposed to show him to his quarters. Wade was tall and broad-shouldered, with a relaxed way of moving that Vialkos found immediately suspicious. He smiled when he shook Vialkos's hand. He asked if Vialkos needed help with his bag. Vialkos said no. Wade shrugged and led him down the corridor anyway. The inside of the ship was just as loud as the outside had promised. Soldiers moved through the corridors in small groups, talking and occasionally bumping shoulders in a familiar way. Some of them were running what appeared to be equipment checks, but doing it while holding conversations about things that had nothing to do with equipment. Vialkos passed one group playing a card game on top of a storage crate. None of them looked like they were going to war. He was brought to the command deck to meet Captain Leon Carver. Leon was standing at a long table covered in maps and data screens. He was not young, and his face had the kind of settled, worn quality that comes from a long time spent in difficult places. He looked up when Vialkos entered. He did not smile or frown. He put out his hand, and Vialkos shook it. Leon told him he was welcome on the ship. He told him he could observe anything he wanted as long as he stayed clear when things moved fast. He told him that Lieutenant Dana Cole would give him a full briefing in 30 minutes. Then he turned back to his maps. Vielkos waited for something more. There was nothing more. The briefing with Dana Cole was held in a small room off the main corridor. She had short, dark hair and the kind of steady eyes that made Vielkos feel like she was already ahead of whatever he was about to say. She put up the battlefield maps without preamble and walked him through the Ravager positions with flat, even language. The numbers were not good. The Ravager Collective held the entire forward sector. They had destroyed the Confederation's supply depots. They had cut the communication lines. They had, by any reasonable calculation, already won. Vielkos asked her what the plan was. She told him they were going in through the South Passage, cutting through the Ravager outer ring and pushing toward the old Confederation base to use it as a staging point. She said this the same way someone might describe a route through familiar streets. Vielkos looked at the map. The South Passage was the most heavily guarded point of the entire Ravager perimeter. He asked her if she understood what she had just described. She said yes. Then she closed the briefing and left. That night, Vielkos sat in his assigned quarters and tried to write his first report for the High Council. He stared at the blank entry for a long time. Outside his door, he could still hear voices. Someone was telling a story. Someone else was laughing again. He wrote, "The humans do not appear to be afraid." He stared at that sentence. Then he added, "I am not yet certain if this is a good thing." Then he saved the entry and turned off the light. The ship hummed around him, steady and constant. Somewhere down the corridor, someone was still talking. Vielkos lay on the narrow bunk and listened to the sound of people who seemed completely comfortable with what was coming, and he found that the longer he listened, the less he slept. The Arden's Cross dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Sector 9, and the first thing Vielkos saw through the observation window was fire. Not a battle, not an exchange of weapons, just fire. The kind that happens after a battle is already over. What had once been a Confederation resupply station hung in the dark like a broken tooth, half of it blown open, lights gone, drifting slowly in a direction it was never supposed to go. Vielkos pressed his hand against the cold glass and stared at it. He had read the reports about what happened to this station. Reading a report and looking at the thing itself were two very different experiences. Leon Carver stood behind him. He did not look at the station for long. He turned to the navigation desk and told the crew to begin the approach. His voice was the same as it had been in the briefing room. Even. Flat. Like a man reading off a list. They entered the South Passage 6 hours later. The first Ravager contact happened before anyone expected it. Vielkos was at his observation post, a small reinforced alcove just off the main deck with a clear view of the forward screens. He had his recorder running and his notes open. He was prepared to document a military operation from a careful and professional distance. And then the ship shook. It was not a gentle shaking. It was the kind that throws things off surfaces and makes people grab for anything solid. The lights went to emergency red. Someone on the main deck was calling out damage readings in a quick, steady voice. Vielkos grabbed the edge of his console and held on and looked at the forward screen and saw them. Ravager attack craft, small and fast and already inside what should have been a safe distance. They had been waiting. They had known the South Passage would be used and they had been waiting in it. Vielkos's first thought was that this was the end of the mission before it had started. His second thought was interrupted by Dana Cole's voice coming over the internal comm. She told the ship's gun crews to hold fire for 8 seconds. She named 4 specific targets and assigned them in order. She told the pilot to begin a roll to the port side on her mark. She gave the mark. The ship rolled. The Ravager craft, which had been positioned to catch the Arden's Cross from both sides, suddenly found only one side of the ship where they expected 2. 3 of Dana's named targets were destroyed in the first volley. The fourth peeled off and ran. From contact to resolution was less than 40 seconds. Vielkos sat very still in his alcove and did not write anything for a moment. They reached the old Confederation base by nightfall on the first day. Nightfall was a relative term in space, but the humans used it anyway, organizing their time by a day and night rhythm that they carried with them wherever they went, like a habit they could not break. The base was mostly intact, and the Ravagers had not bothered to destroy it because they did not need to. It was surrounded. Going in was easy. Getting out would be a different question. The battle group set up positions quickly and without much discussion. Vielkos watched the soldiers move through the base like they had rehearsed it, each person knowing where to go without being told. Some of them were checking weapons. Some were setting up communication equipment. Sergeant Nia Ford had the medical station running within an hour. Beds arranged, supplies sorted. A calm efficiency that Vielkos found quietly impressive. The Ravager attack came at night, local time, when most of the Confederation's remaining soldiers at the base had been trying to rest. 3 columns hit the perimeter at once, each from a different direction. Alarms went off, and the Confederation soldiers who had been sheltering in the base began to move toward the rear exits, following the instinct to find distance from the noise. Vielkos saw this from the command post and thought it made sense. The rational thing, when something much larger than you attacks from 3 sides, is to find a way out. The humans did not move toward the rear exits. Leon watched the screens for a moment. Then he told Wade Hunt to take a unit and hold the east corridor. He told Dana to take the outer wall. He did not shout. He did not raise his voice. He spoke in the same tone he used when discussing supply lists, and the soldiers around him moved like he had pulled a string. Vielkos stepped out of the command post to see better. He immediately wished he had stayed inside. The fighting at the outer wall was close and loud, and the kind of thing that his training as a diplomat had never fully prepared him to witness firsthand. Dana Cole moved along the wall without stopping, speaking to soldiers, redirecting them, pointing at positions. She was not hiding behind cover. She was in the middle of it. A Ravager energy burst hit the wall 3 meters from her, and she did not flinch. She kept talking. The soldiers kept listening. Then Vielkos saw something that stopped him completely. One of the human soldiers, a man whose name Vielkos did not yet know, was struck by a direct hit from a Ravager weapon. It was not a grazing shot. It was a full-force strike to the chest. By every medical understanding Vielkos had, the soldier should have gone down immediately. Instead, the soldier turned. He knelt beside a piece of equipment he had been carrying, finished pressing a sequence of buttons into it, and placed it against the base of the outer wall. He pressed the final trigger. The charge detonated, and the Ravager column pressing on that section of the wall broke apart. Then the soldier sat down against the wall and did not get up again. Nia Ford reached him within a minute. She worked on him for a long time. Vielkos did not see the outcome. He turned away because he was looking at his own hands and noticing that they were shaking. Later, when the attack had been pushed back and the base was quiet again, Leon Carver stood at the main screen and looked at the Ravager positions. He did not speak for several minutes. Then he pointed at a section of the map to the north and told Dana to move a unit there before dawn. Vielkos asked him how he had seen that from here. Leon said he had not seen it. He had felt it. The Ravagers always shifted weight to their right when they pulled back. He had noticed that the first time. He said it like it was obvious. Vielkos had been watching the same screens and had noticed nothing of the kind. He opened his recorder that night and found that he had written almost nothing during the attack. There were a few numbers. There were timestamps. There was one line that said, "The soldier completed his task." He stared at that line for a long time. Then he closed the recorder and sat in the dark and listened to the bass settle back into something like quiet. Vielkos had spent his career believing that every situation had a point at which the logical outcome became clear. and a moment where the numbers stopped being numbers and became a conclusion. He had spent years training himself to find that moment quickly, to name it before others could, to file a clean report and move to the next assignment. On the third night of the campaign, he found that moment. The Ravager Collective sent a new kind of attack, not columns, not a frontal push. They targeted the base from the inside out, in a pattern that Vilkos had not seen documented in any of the Confederation's intelligence files. They hit the communication array first, which meant the battle group could no longer reach the Confederation fleet. They hit the ammunition depot next. Then, with precision that suggested they had a detailed map of the base's interior, they struck the medical station. The explosion was not enormous, and it was small and focused and designed to collapse a specific section of the structure, which it did. Nia Ford was inside when it happened. Vilkos saw it on the screens. He logged the time. He noted the structural failure. He opened a new entry in his report and typed, "The medical station has been destroyed. Likely casualties. The human battle group has lost its primary care capability. Assessment, this unit is no longer combat effective." He read what he had written. It was accurate. It was logical. He saved the entry. Then he watched the feed from the medical station's external camera and saw something that made him stop. There was movement in the wreckage. Nia Ford pulled herself out from under a section of collapsed wall. She was moving slowly, which meant she was hurt. She stood up. She looked around at the station, but she said something that the external microphone did not fully capture. Then she looked at the soldiers around her who had also been caught in the collapse, and she went to the nearest one and knelt beside him. She had a broken arm. Vilkos could tell from the angle of it. He had medical training as part of his diplomatic certification, and he knew what a broken arm looked like. He also knew what people with broken arms were supposed to do, which was stop using that arm and seek treatment. Nia Ford did not do this. She used both arms to stabilize the wounded soldier beside her. She called out to another soldier who was conscious and told him to bring her what remained of the medical supplies from the side storage unit that had not fully collapsed. The soldier did it. She treated 4 people in 40 minutes. She set a fracture. He closed a wound that was bleeding badly and talked 2 soldiers through shock in a voice so steady they both visibly calmed. She did all of this before she let anyone look at her own arm. Vilkos deleted the entry he had written. He sat for a moment, then he opened a new one and wrote nothing. The loss of communications had cut Corporal Wade Hunt off from the main unit. Wade had been leading 6 soldiers on a patrol of the eastern corridor when the attack began, and when the comm array went down, he had no way to reach Leon or Dana. He had no updated map of the Ravager positions. He had no reinforcements available. His 6 soldiers were crouched in a corridor that was getting smaller by the minute as the Ravager forces pushed in from both ends. Vilkos did not witness what happened next directly. He saw it on a secondary camera that was still feeding to the command post, and even that view was partial. But he watched Wade look at the corridor, then at the ceiling, then at the wall to his left. He watched Wade say something to the soldiers beside him. He watched all 6 of them move toward the wall. The wall led to a section of the base that Vilkos's maps marked as structurally compromised and impassable. He had flagged this section in his own notes on the first day as somewhere no one should go. The floors were unstable. There were open gaps between levels. The lighting was gone. Vilkos had labeled it a dead end. Wade took his unit through it anyway. They came out the other side 12 minutes later, behind the Ravager command node that was directing the entire attack on the base. Vilkos watched the camera feed and could not fully understand what he was seeing for a moment. Then he understood. Wade had looked at a wall that every reasonable map said led nowhere and had decided to go through it. He had found a path through an impassable section by simply walking into it and dealing with whatever he found. The Ravager command node was destroyed in less than 3 minutes. The coordinated attack on the base immediately began to lose its shape. The Ravager columns that had been pushing in from the east faltered. The pressure on the outer wall dropped. Dana, who had been holding a defensive line with 15 soldiers for the past hour, noticed the change instantly. She told her unit to push. Later that night, Leon received the report about Wade's action. He was standing at the main screen, and he read the brief message twice. Then he closed his eyes for a moment and said nothing. Then he opened his eyes and told his communications officer to coordinate the next phase of the push with all available units. Vialkos found a quiet corner of the command post and sat down. He had been awake for over 20 hours. His recorder was in his hand, but he had stopped trying to organize his notes into proper entries. He had started writing in plain language instead, which was something he had not done in a professional report since his early career. He wrote, "I thought I knew what I was watching. I thought this was a story about soldiers losing and then stopping. I have been wrong about this from the beginning." Leon sat beside him at some point in the night. Vialkos was not sure when. Leon was quiet for a while. Then Vialkos asked him what made him think his people could survive this. Leon said they had not thought about surviving, they had thought about holding long enough to matter. Vialkos asked him what the difference was. Leon looked at the floor for a moment. He said that surviving was about you. Holding long enough to matter was about the thing you were holding for. Vialkos wrote that down. He stared at it. He did not fully understand it, but he wrote it down because something in him said that this sentence was the most important thing he had heard since he arrived on this ship. He did not sleep that night. He sat in the dim light of the command post and listened to the base breathe around him, to the sounds of soldiers moving, of Nia Ford still working somewhere down the corridor with one good arm, and of Wade Hunt's unit cleaning equipment and saying very little. And he thought about a wall that everyone said was impassable, and one young soldier who had walked through it anyway. Dawn came slowly in Sector 9, filtered through the base's cracked observation panels in thin strips of gray light. Vialkos had not slept. He stood at the command post window and watched the light change and thought about what Leon had said. Holding long enough to matter. He turned the phrase over in his mind, the way he might turn a stone over to see what was underneath it. Leon Carver was already at the main table when Vialkos turned around. Leon looked like a man who had slept 4 hours and decided that was enough. His eyes were clear. He was studying the maps again, tracing the Ravager positions with one finger, moving slowly from point to point. The Vialkos noticed that he did this without speaking, without asking anyone anything, just reading the map like a person reading a familiar book. Then Leon told his staff to prepare for the counteroffensive. Vialkos had expected the other officers to question this. The battle group had taken serious losses over the past 3 days. The medical station was half collapsed. Communication with the fleet was still limited. By standard military doctrine, the correct response to the situation they were in was consolidation. Hold position, wait for reinforcement, do not advance. Vialkos knew this doctrine well. He had read it. He had cited it in reports. Nobody in that room questioned the order. Dana Cole began issuing assignments within minutes. She moved through the room like someone who had a list in her head and was simply working through it. She gave each unit a direction, a target, a time. She told Wade Hunt's unit to take the north approach and hold the ridge above the Ravager's eastern supply line. She told the remaining Confederation soldiers, who had been sheltering in the base since the first night, that they were being assigned to support positions. Some of them looked uncertain. Dana did not appear to notice this. She moved on to the next assignment. Leon announced that he would lead the central push himself. Vialkos heard this and looked up. He watched the soldiers around Leon. None of them were surprised. One of them, an older soldier with a scar along his jaw, simply nodded and checked his equipment. Vialkos had asked Dana about this the previous night. and about why Leon would put himself at the front of an advance when his value was clearly in the command structure. Dana had said what she said, that Leon did not ask anyone to go somewhere he would not go. Vielkos had filed this as a cultural note. Standing in that room, watching the soldiers ready themselves without hesitation or complaint, he was beginning to understand that it was more than a note. The counteroffensive began an hour after dawn. It was slow. Vielkos had somehow expected it to be fast, a sudden surge that swept the Ravager lines away. Instead, it was grinding and difficult and required every unit to fight for every meter of ground. The Ravagers did not break easily. They were numerous, and they pushed back hard every time the human units advanced. The Vielkos watched from a reinforced position behind the main line and tried to track everything at once and mostly failed. Nia Ford operated throughout the advance. She had rigged a temporary medical station in one of the intact storage rooms, and she moved between it and the front line carrying supplies and treating soldiers in the field. She still had only one good arm. Vielkos saw her several times during the morning hours, and each time she was moving, never stopping, working with a focused speed that made her seem like a different kind of machine than the ones he was used to. At one point, she appeared beside him and asked him to hold a piece of equipment while she worked on a wounded soldier. He held it. She worked. She did not thank him when she was done, just took the equipment back and moved to the next person. Dana was hit during the midday push. A Ravager energy burst caught her on the left shoulder and spun her around. She went to one knee. The soldier beside her reached out to help her, and she put her hand up. She stayed on one knee for about 3 seconds, then she stood up and told the unit to keep moving. She continued issuing commands from that point, with her arm hanging at a wrong angle and her voice exactly as flat and even as it had been at the start of the day. Vielkos filed a note on this. Then he looked at the note and deleted it because it did not say anything close to what he actually wanted to say. Nia Ford appeared at Dana's side in the late afternoon. She must have heard. She looked at the shoulder. She said 4 words to Dana, too quietly for Vielkos to hear. Dana nodded once. Nia treated the shoulder in the field in less than 5 minutes, working around the armor without removing it, and then they both went back to what they had been doing. Neither of them mentioned it again that Vielkos saw. The Ravager lines began to weaken in the early afternoon. It happened slowly at first, a softening at the edges, units pulling back slightly, their advance losing its aggressive shape. Vielkos almost missed it. Then he looked at the map and saw it clearly, and his breath caught. The Ravager Collective did not retreat. This was documented. They pushed until the enemy stopped, and then they pushed more. Their entire tactical philosophy was built on the assumption that there was a point where the other side stopped. Vielkos had read this in their strategic profile. The Confederation's generals had known it too, and it had not helped them. Because the Confederation had stopped. The humans had not stopped. They had slowed. They had bled. They had lost people and kept going with whoever was left. And now, for the first time in this campaign, the Ravager Collective was doing something its tactical profile said it did not do. It was stepping back. Vielkos sent a transmission to the High Council. It was brief. He told them the humans were winning. There was a pause before the response came. The council asked at what cost. Vielkos looked out at the field. He looked at Nia Ford in the distance, still moving. He looked at the place where the medical station used to be. He thought about the soldier who had finished placing his charge before sitting down against the wall. So he told the council that the cost was something they should think about very carefully before asking again. By evening, the Ravager forward units had pulled back past the first ridge line. The base was secure. The surrounding sector, which 3 days ago had been entirely controlled by the Ravager Collective, had a gap in it large enough to bring in reinforcement and supplies. The Confederation's front line, which the High Council had believed was finished, existed again. Vielkos sat in the command post as the light outside faded, and tried to write a proper summary of the day. He had timestamps. He had position data. He had a record of every unit's movements and every order that had been given. He had all the pieces of a proper military report. He could not make them add up to what he had actually seen. When the quiet after a battle is different from ordinary quiet. Vilkos had not known this before. He had read descriptions of it in historical accounts and thought he understood. He did not understand. The quiet after a battle has weight to it, a particular kind of heaviness that sits in the air like something physical, something you can almost put your hand through. It is not peaceful. It is the opposite of peaceful. It is what is left when everything loud has finished. The Ravager Collective had pulled back to their secondary line during the night. They were not gone. They would regroup. They would come back in some form, larger or smarter or from a direction that had not been considered. Everyone in the base knew this. Nobody said it. The morning after the retreat, the human soldiers moved through the base and through the surrounding ground in a silence that Vilkos could not quite name. They were collecting their dead. They did it with the same care and the same focus they had put into everything else. Small groups of 2 or 3, moving methodically, not rushing, taking time with each person. Vilkos watched from a distance. He had seen the aftermath of battles before, in recordings and reports, and once from the window of a shuttle passing over a conflict zone. He had never seen it like this, from the ground, close enough to see the faces of the people doing the collecting. None of them spoke much. Some of them said nothing at all. A few of them cried, not loudly, not in a way that stopped their hands from working, but steadily, like something that was simply happening. Wade Hunt carried someone for a long distance without putting them down. Nia Ford, who by all rights should have been resting, walked alongside him with her repaired arm still wrapped tight against her side. She did not help carry. She just walked beside him. Vilkos did not know the words for what that was in any of the 12 languages he spoke. He found himself walking the field without having decided to do so. His feet had simply started moving, and he had followed them. The ground here had been fought over, and it showed. There were craters and scorch marks and places where the surface material had melted and re-solidified into strange shapes. The light was thin and gray in the way that Sector 9 always seemed to be thin and gray, like the sun had never quite committed to the place. He walked for a long time without talking to anyone. He passed soldiers he recognized and soldiers he did not. Nobody asked him what he was doing there. Nobody told him to leave. He was simply another presence on the field, moving through the quiet alongside everyone else. Leon Carver found him eventually, standing at the far eastern edge of the field where the ground rose slightly before dropping away toward the ridge. Leon stood beside him and looked at the same direction Vilkos was looking. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Vilkos had his recorder in his hand. He did not turn it on. He told Leon that he had spent his whole career believing that the most dangerous thing a civilization could produce was a large and well-organized military force, numbers and weapons and strategy. He said he had believed that fear was a rational response to those things, that you feared what could destroy you in physical terms. Leon listened. He did not interrupt. Vilkos said that he had revised this belief. He said he was not sure he had the right words for the revision yet. Leon looked at the ridge for a while. Then he said that the galaxy had the wrong idea about why humans were dangerous. He said people thought it was the weapons, or the numbers, or the tolerance for pain. He said those things were real, but they were not the reason. He said the reason was simpler and harder to measure. He said humans were dangerous because of what they were willing to do to themselves when they were protecting something that mattered to them. He said that was the part no tactical model had ever successfully predicted. And he said you could prepare for strength and you could prepare for numbers, but it was very difficult to prepare for someone who had already decided that the cost did not matter. He stopped. He looked at the field. Then he said that the cost always mattered. He said anyone who told you otherwise was lying or had not paid it yet. But he said that sometimes the thing you were protecting was large enough that you paid it anyway. He walked back toward the base without looking behind him. Vael-Kos stayed at the ridge for a while longer. The report he filed with the High Council was the longest document he had produced in 30 years of service. He sat in the command post of the Arden's Cross during the long return journey and wrote without stopping, which was also something he had not done since early in his career. Most of it was not tactical analysis. The tactical analysis was there, in the early sections, accurate and complete, because he was still a professional and that was still his job. But after the first several pages, the report changed into something he did not have a standard category for. He wrote about the soldier who placed his charge before sitting down. He wrote about Nia Ford and her one working arm, and the 40 minutes in the ruined medical station. He wrote about Wade Hunt and the impassable wall. He wrote about Dana Cole on one knee in the middle of the advance, standing back up before anyone could reach her. He wrote about Leon standing at the maps at dawn, tracing positions with one finger, already seeing something no one else could see yet. And he wrote that he had arrived on this assignment believing he was going to observe a desperate military unit attempt, something that would not work. He wrote that he had been correct, that it was desperate and incorrect about everything else. He wrote that he had spent 3 decades documenting conflicts and that this was the first time he had finished an assignment, uncertain whether his tools were adequate for what he had seen. He wrote, "The galaxy is afraid of humans. This is not new information. What is new, at least for me, is that I now understand the fear correctly. It is not that humans are violent. Many species are violent. It is not that they are large or numerous or technically advanced, because by the measures of the Confederation they are none of those things in any outstanding degree. It is that when humans are protecting something they have decided matters, they stop calculating. They stop measuring cost against outcome the way every rational actor is supposed to. They reach a place past logic that most species do not have, and from that place they become something that cannot be predicted or modeled or planned against. And they do not reach that place reluctantly. They seem almost comfortable there." The High Council read the report in session. Vael-Kos was not present. He heard about it afterward from Orosve, who had originally made the motion to request human help. Orosve said the room had been quiet for a long time when the reading ended. The general who had spoken about humiliation at the beginning of all this did not say anything. No one spoke for several minutes. And then the council voted to formally renegotiate the terms of the human alliance. The humans were no longer to be classified as a lesser partner. The designation was changed after considerable internal debate to Allied Force. Vael-Kos thought this was the correct decision and also probably overdue. On the last day of the return voyage, he passed Wade Hunt in the corridor near the ship's mess. Wade was carrying a tray of food and moving with the same easy, unhurried walk he had had on the first day. He gave Vael-Kos a nod the way you would nod to someone you recognized but did not need to stop for. Then he turned the corner and was gone. Vael-Kos stood in the corridor and watched the empty space where Wade had been. And the young soldier who had walked through an impassable wall with 6 people and come out the other side behind an enemy command node was now going to eat his lunch. He was not thinking about the wall anymore. He was not thinking about the battle or the losses or the Ravager Collective. Vael-Kos did not know this for certain, but he was sure of it. He was already thinking about what came next. Vael-Kos did not write a note about this. He had learned, over the course of this campaign, that some things did not translate into notes. Some things you simply had to carry with you and let them change the shape of what you knew. He carried this one for the rest of his life.